I'm happy to welcome you on behalf of the board of the Genshagen Foundation for the open discussion of our major project, Culture and Sustainability, a creative exchange in Europe. In the context of the German EU Council presidency, we want to show how culture and sustainability are interlinked, but also what the creative potential and the responsibility for arts and culture in this global challenge is. With today's discussion and with all the other offers we have on our internet platform, we would like to invite you for a European interdisciplinary exchange. Our virtual 3D gallery makes it possible for you to enjoy art and culture and an exchange about it. Many different voices from Germany, France, Poland, Britain, Belgium, the Netherlands, and other countries will be heard over the next few weeks to come. From literature, philosophy, the arts, theater, film, and other sectors. The opening discussion now aims to show what the project entails, and we would also like to show you the new film of the Theatre of the Anthropocene, Requiem for a Forest. Our European panel will be moderated by Dr. Tanja Busse, science journalist and author, and I'm really happy about it. Well, I'm really happy about everything we managed to organize together here. The discussion and the web platform were supported and organized by lots of people involved, actively making a commitment. I would like to thank them all, especially my colleague Magdalena Nigio. I would also like to thank all our partners and the Commissioner of the Federal Government for Culture and the Media, who supported and sponsored the project in the context of the German EU Council presidency. I hope you enjoy the afternoon, and I would now like to ask Professor Kunst, President of Humboldt University and one of the initiators of the Theatre of the Anthropocene. Mrs. Kunst, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Eder. Mrs. Eder, Mr. Malinowski, Mr. Schneider, Mr. Radatz, dear participants, and dear creative artists. I am very happy that during an event which has both culture and sustainability in its title, the Theatre of the Anthropocene was asked to participate. Maybe this is a confirmation for our efforts at Humboldt University of Berlin. This theatre is a stage following Humboldt's ideal. It combines culture, science, and involvement into society. This idea of the project emerged during many discussions, during which Mr. Schneider also participated within the framework of the Humboldt Year. And in the course of the discussions with our highly estimated colleague, Mr. Professor Antje Boetius, the director of the Alfred Wegener Institute, and in talks with Mr. Frank Radatz, who is participating in today's discussion and who represents the Theatre of the Anthropocene, this project was developed, and now the pilot phase is being implemented at Humboldt University. And we hope also to find new ideas during this event. We want to involve even more creative artists into the project. But let me tell you how this cooperation developed and why the Theatre of the Anthropocene is also a very important module of today's development of the university. Sustainability for Humboldt University has always had a very important role. If we bear in mind the people who we took the name from, Alexander von Humboldt was one of the most significant scientists of his era, and he was the one to introduce interdisciplinarity into science. and into describing nature and interdependencies in nature. He described the interdependency between the development of climate and the development of large masses of gases and steam in industrial centers already in 1844, 175 years before Fridays for Future brought climate change to the streets. And one of the most cited ideas of Humboldt was that many things in natural sciences are interlinked with each other, and that only an understanding of these whole interdependencies can lead to understanding the whole of nature. Everything is connected to everything, and in order to understand nature, we need to understand many different facts, from geography to ethnology, and only an intact connection between humans and nature can lead to sustainable development and to creating systematic steps of how to combine knowledge and experience with empathy. And this is what we have to bear in mind today and for the future. Humboldt presented his findings in a very poetic way, and he wanted not only to present facts in his texts, he wanted to emotionally touch his readers. He was a great storyteller. And therefore, he had a very strong impact on the people living in his era. When he gave his lectures on the cosmos, which took place in Berlin, where today the Gorki Theater is situated, these lectures were great events, and many people of Berlin came to listen to these lectures. The hall was packed with people, and these events, these lectures were very popular among the population. What was decisive about Humboldt was that both of the brothers did also bear in mind normal people and not only scientists. They interfered into public debates. They also expressed their opinion about political issues. And if we bear that in mind, we should continue and we should use these ideas for today's developments. We are now experiencing a crisis of our democracy, but also of our climate. We are experiencing a threat of the basis of our lives, and the scale is something that is exceeding our historical experience. We are very astonished of how quickly the natural crisis is developing. It was very astonishing to see the Polarstern ship, which now arrived, came back from the polar circle with new insights, and it became evident that the world as we know it, with ice and snow, will stop existing in the coming years. This is just one example. And I can cite other examples as well. In winter, 15 degrees in the north have become a normal phenomenon, and these developments are threatening many of the world's inhabitants. The scientific findings about the climate crisis have been ignored for decades. But what we should bear in mind when we discuss these things on a political level is that with the beginning of the corona pandemic, we are also experiencing changes in the perception because interdependencies have become more visible, and we can see that trust into science has increased. Science and research are pivotal for solving problems. We are experiencing this every day, and we also have to understand how science works. And we want to do that in a more creative way. We want to vary our approach a little bit in the future, because on the one hand, it is our task to present our findings to the public. These are facts and reliable information. But on the other hand, we also have to translate these findings into a language that is understandable for the public. And if we, as scientists, want to change something, then we have to change our behavior. People want scientific institutes to enter the discourse, not only in scientific contexts, but also in others. And this is something that scientists are dealing with increasingly, particularly when it comes to topics which are of high relevance for the public. For example, the topic of the Anthropocene, the era of the human being. Artists, civil society, and scientists have to be part of one and the same discussion. In the past year, when the Alexander von Humboldt Jubilee was celebrated, it became clear that we have to find new ways in order to understand the interdependencies between our ecosystems. And the Humboldt ideal of a combination of humans and nature was presented with the help of performative readings, concerts, theater plays, and other events. These were new ways of conveying this topic. These were very manifold ways of speaking with different voices, which also included NGOs. But now I don't want to carry coal to Newcastle. I think that Mr. Schneider will tell us about this in more detail. The interaction between science and art makes it possible to find new approaches. Together, we opened new rooms for us, new spaces. We also addressed new target groups. This discussion was new, both for art and for science, but it was a very productive and inspiring one. The scientists are benefiting from a new way and approach to our audience. And that is why we became interested in the theater of the Anthropocene. This is a new way of opening our findings for society and for a broader public. This is part of the whole new strategy of our university, a process that we call Open Humboldt. Here, we want to try out very many different things in order to facilitate an intensive dialogue between university, society, science, public, and so on. These multilateral dialogues should be strengthened with a large number of projects. These include new scientific and cultural projects, for example, the opening of a scientific campus together with the Berlin Museum of Natural Sciences. We want to use our exhibition areas in the Humboldt Forum. On the first floor, we've got an exhibition area which includes the Humboldt Laboratory. And we want to include such things as the Theater of the Anthropocene. Our university has defined its task in a new way. We want to deal with topics which are important for society in more detail in the future. We want to open up our work for a broader public, and that is why these projects are contributing in a new way to the field of the so-called third mission of universities. That means that the core issues of universities are broadened, and these topics will also become part of research and teaching. We are not the only university dealing with this topic. Within the framework of our participation in the strategy of excellence, we are cooperating with other Berlin institutes. We have developed an excellence alliance together with other Berlin universities and the Charité Hospital. And one of our goals is to improve scientific communication and transfer of scientific insights. Together with our partners, we are going to enlarge this field of our work. And for us, for Humboldt University, the main focus is interaction between arts and culture, because in the center of Berlin, we've got an exclusive approach to institutions of culture. To sum up, I would like to quote Alexander von Humboldt, who said, "It's not enough just to complain, you have to work to stop, in order to stop complaining." Today, we would rather say that complaining about what is so bad in the world won't help us. We have to become active, we have to act. Humboldt University has become active in many initiatives. One of them is the Theatre of the Anthropocene. This is a unique interaction between science and culture, and we are estimating this very highly. Now I wish you a productive discussion and an inspiring performance of the Theatre of the Anthropocene. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kunst. I'm really happy to have a chance to moderate the discussion today. I worked on the death of species, biodiversity, and all that for a period of time, and I was really pleased to see Humboldt University picking up the issue. So climate change is something where everyone needs to be involved. As a moderator, I attend a lot of sustainability conferences. I'm just back from the ISDN conference, the European Network of Sustainability Politicians, Experts and Administrators. And usually you meet there politicians talking to scientists, and the sphere of art and culture is very rarely there. Before the conference, there was a youth camp held by the Ministry of the Environment, inviting young people, saying, well, we wanted you to have a chance to talk about a culture of sustainability, how to involve everyone, and not just those who are anyway working in a university or a ministry or wherever. And I think today's discussion is a great opportunity to contribute to that. Sustainability has not just to do with scientific translation into political legislation. No, it has something to do with our view of the world, how we see the world and what we do in the world. And we need artists and cultural workers to tell us more about it. I'm excited and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Now, we have a great panel, and we have from Poland the director of the Institute for Geophysics at the University of Warsaw. He established Nauka i Klimacja, a well-known website. He's involved in the Academy of Sciences. He's the chairman of the board on the climate crisis. And he's one of those scientists saying, it's not enough for me to tell politicians what scientific findings I have. We scientists need to step forward and be part of the discussion. We need to support what we really found out, and this is what he did. And he's the co-author of the film about global warming, saying with the title, "It's okay to panic." You can find it on the internet with German subtitles, but before you go there, you can meet him in person now. Welcome, with a virtual applause, Professor Szymon Malinowski. Dzień dobry, Professor.
Thank you very much for your invitation, and it's a big pleasure to be here with you to learn about the Theatre of the Anthropocene and about all the activities. And I hope we will talk more about the interaction of science and culture, since the way we communicate our knowledge and the way it can be absorbed by the people is extremely important in this time of crisis, of planetary crisis we have to fight with. So it's a short introduction.
Vielen Dank und ich glaube, wir werden da gleich noch ganz viele
Thank you very much. I think that we will get to know about very many interactions between how you introduce your findings into public discussions. We've got another participant who comes from a family of climbers, and he wanted to study something where he can be outdoors as often as possible. I am afraid that now you spend more of your time indoors. You're a professor of glaciology, and you're somebody who observes that politics are reacting much too slowly to the climate crisis. Please welcome Professor Christoph Schneider of the Humboldt University.
Thank you very much for the invitation to this wonderful discussion. That is, I presume it's going to be wonderful. I had the pleasure to work with Mr. Radatz and play a small part in the Theatre of the Anthropocene. So a kind of sideline engagement as a scientist, and was a lot of fun. It was at the start of the academic year 2020, before COVID-19 struck out. And even now, cooperating on the film was just great. I believe even better than a theoretical discussion is indeed playing an active part, and do go and enjoy the theater. Don't run away from the discussion because you want to make a film. I think we carry on for a while, and perhaps it will lead to a good idea for another film. But now I would like to introduce our third discussant. He's a publicist and a dramaturg, and he is very much interested in everything from climate to water management and ocean research. His theater is nearly closed now. He worked with lots of famous names in the sector, with Kastorf, Gottsched, Cornelis, Terzopoulos, Schleef, and others. He teaches at a number of universities, and he's the initiator about the wonderful idea of the Theatre of the Anthropocene, together with Professor Kunz and Antje Boetius, the leader of the head of the Alfred Wegener Institute. And his idea that he promotes is bring together the civil society, art and culture, because we have to come to grips with the crisis of the Anthropocene. Exactly in the spirit of Alexander von Humboldt, he did just want to take measurements, but also to feel and experience things. And he put all that on the theater stage, and then Corona struck. I think you had a chance to show the Requiem for a Forest once in the Veterinary Anatomical Theatre of Humboldt University, that it had to be shut down, and now the theatre moved to the film stage, and since then it has found a way to continue working. So welcome, Dr. Frank Radatz. Great of you to be part of us here.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy that this discussion is taking place, that we can see the film together with a big audience. That's great. One short remark. In this week, our theatre will participate in a festival in the German city of Halle. But of course, there are very few possibilities to be present with a real audience at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Radatz. And in fact, we would all be in that wonderful castle where the foundation has its headquarters, and we could have a great chance to have an open discussion. Now you're sitting behind your screens. Unfortunately, there are many, many kilometers and electric cables between us, but we would invite you to take an active part in the discussion. Send us your questions, your comments via chat. Margareta Nietzsche of the foundation will collect the questions and try to integrate it into the discussion where fit. So please send us your questions and comments so that we know that you are there and interested. Mr. Radatz, I would like to start with you and your idea of the Theatre of the Anthropocene. Why? Because all scientists and a number of cultural workers and artists are willing to respond to such issues. Why do we need this theater of the Anthropocene for you to go forward?
I would describe it the following way. I've been dealing with sustainability and theater for a long time. In 2007, we already had one performance at the Zollverein, and then I realized that this topic is not part of what theater is dealing with normally. But the term of Anthropocene gives this whole story a new dimension, because Anthropocene, we now know that we live in the Anthropocene because there are sciences, because we are realizing that the polar ice is melting, that satellites are collecting scientific data, and these are new prerequisites. And we can't deal with this on the level of me and nature, although very many performative projects look like that. And when with Mrs. Boetius and Professor Kunst, we started talking about that, we thought that it's a great opportunity for theater to do something new, because we are asking ourselves the question, how can theater and science cooperate without theater becoming a kind of pedagogical instrument? We want to participate in this project and in this process. And this new era of the Anthropocene gives us the opportunity to get new insights, to try out new ways of performing. The scholar Eva Horn wrote about the Anthropocene that we do not only want to talk about ecological topics, but we want to reflect in art what has to be developed in order to stay abreast of the developments in this new era.
What's your explanation why it all starts so late? The term Anthropocene was discussed, defined, and debated a long time ago, and now the theater suddenly come in. But Anthropocene, the idea that we humans have such a great influence on the world, that all geological processes change, and that we can already predict what happens, right down to the final end of the civilization of life as we know it. So we just heard it will be the end of snow and ice very soon. Why did the theatrical world join the discussion so late?
Of course, that's a key question. Theater works in a very simple way. Problems, conflicts between people are presented by people. And everything can be performed and shown by people and can be solved by people. But now theater has to deal with the problem that it cannot answer problems or questions as it was in ancient times. Then people said, now something is happening in nature and some god is responsible for that. Now people have to go beyond society, to go beyond our imagination in order to understand powers, in order to articulate how we live. And these are things that have to find a new definition of the social, for example. And this is one part of your topic. We have to perceive animals, for example, as part of our existence, and we have to interact with them. For example, we define laws in order to protect animals. So we have to get out of this anthropocenic imagination and approach. We have to get rid of the thought that the human is the center of everything. And that means for theater that we have to abandon traditions and have to find new way of approaching these things.
In other words, what you actually want to do is to revolutionize the theater the way you just described it. I'm looking forward to having more about this. Professor Malinowski, you are a scientist, internationally active as a climate researcher, and you became an activist and protagonist of a film. It's Okay to Panic is the title. I would recommend to all of you in the audience who haven't seen it yet to watch it. And you tell us a lot of things about how to deal with the climate crisis and what it means to deny it all. Can you tell us something about that and the role of science and the responsibility of science?
You know, the story is the following, that I work in clouds. And so I am somehow detached from the earth. Okay, so what is extremely important, and I think it's from the point of view Dr. Radat said, that the culture is decoupled from nature now, and both the culture in a wide sense, like all human activities, and the culture in a narrow sense, part of it is theater. And we have to find links how to couple human system and nature system together, since the culture grown on natural system, and when people were, you know, just a small part of nature, they started to work just using the nature to improve life, to improve all activities. And at a certain moment, culture and people grow to the level that we can't do it anymore, since we got to planetary limits. And I think it's our common responsibility first to communicate the science, since the Anthropocene can be explained in numbers, in cause and effect. So we have to teach the people about the cause and effects, that what we undertake has a strong impact on nature, and this nature will feed back on human system again, sometime to the level of positioning existential threat. And it's not easy, you know. If you sit in a lab, or for instance, when I fly with the aircraft, I measure temperature at 5 millimeter resolution. Yes, just to understand how droplets collide in clouds and how the rain is formed. And it's very long way from this very specific scientific activities, then through understanding, like Professor Kunst told, to put it all together in the whole system and then communicate to the people. And I think that art has a lot of space to help us with this communication. And I don't think it's just simple teaching or whatever. It's just a kind of making us sensitive to the problem, which we don't understand since we are decoupled.
Würden Sie denn sagen, dass die Kunst sozusagen...
Would you say that the art is just a loudspeaker to translate scientific findings to those people who would find it difficult to understand it as non-scientists? Or would the arts and culture have to change because the theater used to be different in the past, but now we need to understand the world in a completely different way, in a setting where culture and nature are no longer decoupled, but very closely together? What's your view of the art in this respect?
I think that loudspeaker is a wrong example. It has to be a kind of a translator, interpreted. Since using science, we use numbers, use physical laws, but it's very difficult to translate it to the human feelings and understanding of what's going on such a personal way. So scientists just are not trained to do it and are not prepared to do such things, and we need support from the art, from the theater, from music. On the other hand, the support has to be based on a kind of scientific understanding. So we have to explain some background, since sometimes this kind of message which is given by the art can be misleading. So we have to collaborate closely to give a right message.
Danke. Ich bin ganz gespannt, wie Herr
Thank you. Now I'm excited to listen to Mr. Schneider, because he's one of those scientists, just as Professor Malinowski, who say that we need to open the doors to our laboratories and research departments and talk about what we are doing. You're lucky enough to work at a university where the president says, all right, we are open Humboldt. We take Humboldt outside. We explain how it all is interconnected. What's your experience with the role of a scientist who was not necessarily a communicator, who did not really feel drawn to the theatrical stage? How would you try to describe your changes? Well, certainly science must communicate its findings, must try to find co-workers, supporters, dedicated people to shape the transformation process. But this is not what science must do alone. Basically, it's a process that the whole of society needs to be involved everywhere in the world, because we are in a century where the socio-ecological transformation is a must in order to enable civilization to survive the immediate future. We shouldn't live beyond our ecological constraints, but we must also respect the social limitations of our world. Social cohesion will be under pressure when the ecological framework conditions no longer give us a chance to use sufficient economic resources for civilization. Now, when we team up with culture and the arts, we must be very careful not to instrumentalize arts and culture to transport scientific findings. Nearly always, this will lead to second-class artistic output. The Secession building in Vienna is entitled with Freedom to the Arts and Art to Freedom. Arts must contribute their own angle, just as philosophy needs to contribute its own view on the Anthropocene. Ecological, biophysiological, and other research contribute their own angles. All this must be added, linked up. We need to understand what they try to tell us. We will link up things, but we will not be able to establish the primacy of the one over the other. I always try to communicate what I have found, and this usually works well because people are always interested in icy regions of the world. Everyone is interested in the fate of the polar bears and penguins and whatnot. So you can talk to a Rotary Club or to the management board of a big energy company. It's extremely important for us scientists to learn to communicate our findings. This is the only chance for these findings to have an impact on society and to be taken up by politicians, eventually leading to changes. For me, well, it's rather that I believe that the arts and the sciences do not only rub shoulders, but they also have a lot in common, but not by scientists telling artists what to do or the other way around. No, the point is to walk forward together, to move forward together, to learn from each other at eye level.
I think this is one of the first take-home messages of today, that both are dealing with existential threats for human beings, that they have to deal with each other and cooperate. I think that's what all of you think. Before we continue our discussion about how this cooperation could look like and how we could involve more people and also politicians, I would like to go one step back and ask for responsibility. Mr. Schneider, in many of your interviews, you said that politicians are reacting much too slowly. Insights of science have to be communicated better. For 30 years, the danger, the threat is known, but we have reacted much too slowly, and now we are in a dramatic situation. Should science have reacted in a different way? Can we look for responsible people in science? And another question to Mr. Malinowski also, and to Mr. Radatz about the responsibility of the arts. Mr. Schneider, can we look for somebody responsible in science? Could we have done something differently?
Well, the coal dioxide molecule has the effect of greenhouse gas. We've known that for decades. Joe Tyndall in the 1960s, 70s has shown us everything about the greenhouse effect in the atmosphere since 1869. We know that a doubling of the CO2 rate in the atmosphere will lead to temperature increases. In 1941 or 42, Helmut Floden, a meteorologist at Würzburg, very clearly said that when he gave his first lecture, that pollution and climate warming will be serious. We've known this from models since 1980s. Since 1972, we've had the limits to growth by the Club of Rome. And since the 1990s, the IPCC has issued regular reports. I would not see where scientists can be accused of not having said that the situation is serious. We've been doing it for 150 years. What else are we supposed to do? Publishing things, teaching students, telling them all about it. I've been doing it for the past 25 years. When I studied in the 1980s, we had discussions on climate change and what way it will impact on migration. This is not a new issue at all for scientists. And it's not that these issues have been disregarded and not been published for years. No, on the contrary, from various angles. We know a lot more now. We know more details, but communication goes on. But the responsibility is in the hands of society and policymakers. They should listen to that and implement it. As a scientist, I can see also on behalf of my colleagues that we are not responsible for a lack of action. On the other hand, however, when we go from here forward, it's important to understand that on a very profound philosophical level, there are two ways of thinking. The one is the engineers have caused all this. They will find a solution using genetic engineering or the CRISPR, the genetic scissors, which just won the Nobel Prize. And the other angle is this will not be enough. We need a different attitude of humans in general. What is enough? Where do we stop? What is a good life? To exaggerate a little, the question is, can we solve the crisis through efficiency on itself, or do we need efficiency and sufficiency? My attitude is that efficiency alone will not be enough. And sufficiency means that large sections of the general public need a new paradigm with regard to what a new life is. What do I really need to live well? Do I need to go snorkeling in the Maldives to have a good life? Do I need a flat screen, 1.5 meters wide? Or is a cycle tour through Brandenburg quite as good as a tour through Canada, to be very practical, very general? Well, the values a society wants to have and in what way it adjusts to the ecological condition that the planet grants us, allows us, that's where we need culture, that's where we need the arts, that's where we need processes of understanding and explaining that the survival of the species in the Anthropocene depends on that. Of course, scientists can do that. The scientists can refer to value-based findings. Legal experts, philosophers, linguists, they all have their specific fields and can share findings from them. We can communicate, but society is called upon to finally take notice of the fact that it's no longer 5 minutes to 12, it's 12 o'clock or a little later even, and it finally must move ahead and support a policy that combines sufficiency as a cultural skill with living together peacefully. I don't think that it will be able to do that without the arts.
So it's 12 o'clock and 2:45. We will listen to Mr. Raddatz too, but Mr. Malinowski, I would like to ask you about what Mr. Schneider just said. Some say that engineers will create solutions. This is a dispute with those who say we have to live in a different way. Where do you position yourselves? Do you also see this disruption also inside sciences?
I agree very much with Professor Schneider said. I would like just to point one thing. This communication of science, we are shouting, but there is no effect on the other side. I think that there is the problem of imagination. It's not only the communication, but the problem of imagination. What is behind this communicate? And this is the people just don't, since they are, people are decoupled from nature. And it's very hard to build imagination. What do this specific communicate mean for the ordinary people? And this is, I think, something the art has to help us and to help itself to survive in the future world. So we are decoupled. Our imagination of our everyday life, that we have to go to this Maldives or use the car, which is 1.5 ton to carry 3 kilograms of goods from the supermarket, which is absurd, absolutely absurd, but we don't see that it is absurd. So there is a way to communicate how we have to work in the future world.
Es gibt ja, Sie sagen ja, wir sind getrennt, wir leben.
Right, you say we often live a rather separate existence. We are far away from nature, living in cities. We do not really know what is going on there, but there's a great longing for nature, particularly people living in dense urban centers. They kind of withdraw, and I have seen the dying forests. We have seen the images of natural disasters. It's not just that people don't see it, or is it rather that we fail to understand what it really means, what the impact of all this? Would it be helpful to live more closer associated with nature?
Well, we don't see these problems. For instance, if you go to the forest, wherever in Europe, you see something like a cornfield, which is pretty artificial. It has not much to do with the real forest and the nature. If you can see the parrot behind your window, this is exactly my everyday experience for last 2 weeks, that the parrot is eating small apples on a tree, and it's unusual. And I know that these parrots are getting to Europe and are increasing. So I see this signs of world changing to the direction which is very misty. And so what? I can see it since I do understand the science behind that, but many people don't see this. And this imagination and art is something we have to improve to make our communication of science more influential.
Herr Radatz, dann sind Sie jetzt dran.
Mr. Radatz, your turn. For more than 100 years, we know what is happening. We know where it could all lead to. Since the Club of Rome, scientists have been shouting at the world, warning to humanity. In the following years, scientists have become ever more vociferous and more outspoken. Professor Schneider rejected the responsibility on the part of the scientists. So now the arts and culture community, is that our salvation? So how shall we do it without instrumentalizing the arts? We should be careful. After all, it's art and not a mouthpiece of science. I wonder how you will dissolve that.
Firstly, I am very grateful to Mr. Schneider for pointing out that arts should not be used as a pedagogical tool of explaining things. I can say something in terms of that later on. But Mrs. Busser, what you are saying is that we need something as a cultural transformation, or maybe we are already within a cultural transformation. And our imagination that the world is available to us, that the resources are unlimited, and so on. There are very many examples of that, that only human interests are relevant. I think this is something we have to abandon. And we already see that. And of course, yes, we have too little in imagination, but I have to say something negative about arts. Mrs. Busse, you work on species dying out and on the loss of biodiversity, but where are the big texts which confront us with this topic? Unfortunately, there are very few of such works of literature. Now, one novel about the dying of trees was published in America. It also won the Pulitzer Prize, but this is a very rare phenomenon. And arts have a great potential. But now young people are going to the streets because they want a new approach. They want a new sensibilization of humankind. And just as Mr. Schneider said, we are shown by Earth that we need a cultural transformation. Otherwise, the planet will start thinking how to get rid of us. We won't be able to live without the planet. The planet can live without us. That is clear.
May I briefly interrupt before we carry on? You also said previously we do not have a space that is completely at our disposal, free for all to grab. That's precisely the debate that Mr. Schneider described. There are those saying, well, the engineers will find a solution to the crisis efficiently, so we will still be able to use the world, put it at our disposal. And the others say, no, on the contrary, we need to become more self-sufficient. We are now in the virtual space supported by the Genshagen Foundation. We agree we need a different approach, but there are many voices saying, no, technology must find a solution. We must control the genes. We must develop geoengineering to control the climate. We need more control over the soil. And isn't that a problem for culture to deal with as well?
Yeah, okay. There's very little I can say about that. Of course, there are also transhumanistic positions, and I understand some of them. And I can also show you where in literature you approach a point where you don't understand whether universe is a machine and human beings are just a machine, and that is why it is possible we have to get rid of our organic substrates. But I think those who believe in transhumanism also need a material basis, and this basis is our planet. Once we will all be stored on chips, then the place where we are stored has also to stand somewhere. So now we are beginning to understand, and I think Humboldt and Hegel were still not able to imagine that. What we are understanding now is that we are living in certain framework conditions in which we are acting, and these framework conditions have started moving and changing, but without this framework we cannot exist. And now we have to start to support them and maybe to find new ways of living. The question for me is, what can arts do? Can they contribute to raising awareness? Or once we are presenting texts, also literary texts, do they have a certain quality? For me, it's very important that arts have an aesthetic quality. We don't operate on the level of simple things. Civilization is presenting simple solutions to us every day, but with the means of arts, we have to find ways of going beyond a simple presentation. We need to find a certain quality to confront the audience with reality and to show them what the reality they are living in looks like. I think that this is a very important task of arts and culture in the coming decades or years. And here I think the approach is that we have to do things that we haven't done in the past.
Do you believe that this is an issue that goes beyond the theater of the Anthropocene? Provided post-corona you can go show your performances again, or would that uncertainty not lead to a situation where people don't find enough to propel them forward? There's navel gazing, there are all sorts of theories that frighten people. So do you see a chance for what moves us today?
I cannot imagine there is some relevant part of the arts that would not deal with the problems of its time. In theater, we differentiate between short-term and long-term impacts. If I ask somebody who just came back from theater what it was about, they say, oh, it was great and very exciting. But if you ask them half a year later, then they say, oh, I don't remember what it was about. But today, the task of theater and arts is to go beyond the short-term impact. And that is what I mean when I talk about quality. We don't only want to excite people, we want to present complex texts. We want to present the whole complexity. Roland Barthes once said that this kind of culture that we need is using the language of universal reporting. At the moment, everything has to be understandable easily, and this means that we also forget things easily. And that is why we need a new scale. We have to understand that we are part in larger courses of time, in larger phenomena. And here I think it is important to include different perspectives, to broaden our horizon and to make things experienceable for people.
Mr. Schneider, Mr. Malinowski, how can this cooperation develop in the future? What form could it take? What's your experience when you opened the window of your ivory tower and shouted to the world outside, we need to act, we have a problem? You both did it in different ways. Mr. Malinowski, you tried out the format of a documentary. Mr. Schneider started a series of open university lectures. So what's your experience? When you just listen to Mr. Radatz, we need to think of new forms of acting. We need to get away from that feeling that everything is at our disposal. What's your experience? What would you tell others? What is working quite well and what doesn't? And how could this new cooperation look like? Who would like to start?
Maybe I will start and then just quickly. No, the story with the art is the following, that it has to reach the people and great number of the people. And to be a kind of devil's advocate, I will say that one of the worst thing art, but not this high art Dr. Radatz is talking about, but the popular art made to climate and planetary crisis was a Dynasty series, which became very popular around the world, and it promoted a kind of a lifestyle which is killing us. And the story is that art, if we have to collaborate together to make this efficient and sufficient lifestyle a kind of fashionable, attractive to the people, since this works, towards solving the problems we have. I don't say that we have to be didactic, since definitely Dynasty was not didactic. There were some, things people liked in this behavior promoted by this series, which builds over, this demand of everything about just not caring about the nature, just this decoupling. We have to show that we have to couple back and to have some satisfaction from this. To make it fashionable, to show that our humanity is in this kind of interaction. So I think we have a big field for collaboration. For me, this film was very difficult, and it was not my idea. Jonathan Ramsey, the editor, convinced me to be a kind of a human, not giving let us say, typical film about the climate crisis with some special charts and other scientific didactics. It was just a kind of sending a personal experience. How do scientists feel about this climate crisis overwhelming us? And I was really surprised by the return. I didn't expect such a strong return. On the other hand, I won't think that the film will appear in any kind of commercial media. If you have seen it, you will understand why, probably. But we have this media which we can communicate the people in a different way than previously, and we have to do it, and we need experience of people like Dr. Radatz and other to build together this communication. It's human communication. We have to communicate between ourselves to change the society.
Herr Schneider, ich denke gerade noch an
Mr. Schneider, I just think of the young people, European young people, delegates to the UN, very interested, educated young people, invited by the Environment Ministry last week, asking them, what do you want us to do? And I think they would have loved our discussion now. Their demand was, we need a culture of sustainability. We want to transform the world back into a garden. And we young people know quite well that we are privileged. We knew all that. We study these things, but how can you reach all the others? And their idea was, Don't be afraid to focus on influencers who have millions of followers. Let them spread the message. What is your view of that? Could that be a way to do it? Beyond a theatrical stage that would only reach those who are anyway dealing a lot with the arts, culture and sciences. What are your ideas, Mr. Schneider? Before I answer your question, the previous one, let me just briefly return to what you said before. You mentioned these two options, either the engineers solve our problems or we need a different kind of culture of sufficiency. You said we need to return back to something. Oh, I'm sorry, that was obviously a slip of the tongue. I would like to contradict you here. We develop a new culture. We move forward to something new. This is the next step of our civilization. Learning that greed, grabbing things, embracing ever more material things, wasting resources, just makes us bored and stiff and disinterested. The real thrill, the new thrill, is to live a sufficient life. Just look at around yourself, a great car, and what a premium manufacturer can achieve. And I have been thinking for years, poor driver, what a dinosaur. Why does he feel the need to drive around half a ton of material without actually using it? Why don't you ride a bicycle? You could easily do that in most cities these days. So it's a question of your attitude. Science produces information, but no attitudes. Attitudes emerge based on culture, based on teaching, based on schools, kindergartens, and all the rest of it. When I do public outreach, as we call it now, that is, as a scientist reaching out to society, then the most satisfying events are when I go to a ground school in a Berlin suburb, and when I tell the kids, they're those 10-year-olds, what scientists do. And it's the most satisfying moment when students come to me after lecture and say, I learned something that changes my view of the world. Of course, if it goes via influencers, via an online channel, no problem with that. The good thing about culture is that, as a rule, it's the interaction of living humans. Even when they are amateur actors on stage, something is happening that is extremely valuable for human interaction. And I basically think that people take a decisive step forward, not when they watch on a big screen and watching YouTube videos. I don't think that this has an effect that makes sense. Humans need human contact, something that touches their emotions, their hearts, something that gives them something they want to be part of, something that touches them, where the meaning of life suddenly is shown up in a different light. It may happen in a physics lecture. It happened to me in a lecture when a professor giving the lecture said the right things that touched me. Theater, music, the arts can do that as well. So when you ask me how does it work best, I don't think that this is an interview in Zeit Online or another online format. I think really, or a Zoom conference of the Genshagen Foundation. Well, it's a very inspiring talk, but I do believe that the direct contact with people, with children, with students, or with people traveling on public transport when I go to our campus. And I suddenly find myself involved in discussion on climate change. That appears to be the more enriching thing. I don't want to know whether it's really the most impressive, but there are books that change the world, and people who are able to write good books, scientists or authors, writers, no problem. That's what we need. But what is extremely important is that it's never about going back to something. No, history always moves forward. It never goes back. The solution is in front of us, not behind us. Sufficiency alone will not suffice. When you look at the various natural science models, it's obvious that sufficiency is not enough. And the pandemic with which we have to deal now shows very impressively that we cannot do without the achievements of scientists and technicians. We are able to deal with the pandemic much better than with all the previous serious pandemic, the Spanish flu or the plague. Relatively speaking, they had always much higher casualties, higher mortality rates, the economic impact, the economic disruptions, be it in the Middle Ages or the early 20th century, were much more serious than what we have now. So it shows that humanity is able to get a grip on things, to get things under control. We only shouldn't make the mistake to say that we can only do it with the help of technology and natural science. It's a parallel thing. In parallel to the industrial and post-industrial development, in the developments in engineering and the ability to deal with nature requires also a cultural transformation, a socio-cultural transformation, socio-economic and socio-ecological transformation requires a cultural context, which can be achieved only, which can be built only by being supported with cultural transformation. And who would be better placed to bring cultural transformation on stage than a theater such as that of the Anthropocene or music of the Anthropocene? And I think the crucial thing is exactly here. And I wouldn't like to forget another player. Nearly all major religions in the world call for the preservation of creation, for the preservation of the world. That's part of their DNA. And of the 8 billion people living in the world today, a vast majority are believers. I think the interreligious dialogue and the intercultural dialogue need to come together, because the idea to preserve creation that you find in all religions must be part of the 17 sustainable development goals, so that the cultural transformation that we are certain is necessary requires those people as supporters. I think the 70 sustainable development goals are lacking two. One of the two is cultural sustainability, which is not part of the UN's list so far, and the other is something that you could interreligious sustainability. Or perhaps there's also a drawer where the atheists could find a home.
Very interesting that somebody researching glaciers and climate is saying that, and not a sociologist. You should have participated in the development of the SDGs. Let me now draw a first conclusion. I think that we all agree that we don't want to speak either about a technological saving of the world versus a cultural one, but that we have to combine both. Of course, this is all about our perception, but also about scientists to continue their work and presenting us solutions. We need an interaction between arts and science, and I think that arts have to play a role in that. Now, we've been talking a lot about how to reach out to people in order to show them how to change their lives. And we have talked a lot about scientists, but we haven't talked about the powers and the stakeholders who want everything to stay the way it was. We know that in America, large oil corporations have taken a lot of money in order to convince people that there is no climate change. We know that there are a lot of people denying climate change, and we know that their number is much bigger now than it was 20, 30 years ago. So there are still very powerful institutions interested in things not to improve or to change. This is not topic of our discussion, but we have to keep that in mind. Do you have an idea of how to deal with that? From an aesthetic point of view, I can only argue that, of course, we can imagine a James Bond film with the topic of ecology that would be popular, but at the same time, something has to be sold. And when it comes to the latest BMW with electric engine, as long as we live in that mode, we have a problem because arts don't want to sell anything. Mr. Schneider just said wonderfully that we want to touch people, that we want to change their attitudes.
Sagen wir mal, Verdunklungs- und Verschleierungsaktivitäten gibt schon.
These activities to darken or to make things less clear for people, these activities have been existing since the 70s. Maybe we can develop some theater play about that topic. The dimension exists, and we should keep that in mind. But we very often see that we have a different dimension, that the cinema, literature are not able to reach the people in the same way as others do who sell things.
I want to read that immediately or see it as a film. Professor Malinowski, perhaps you have an idea, because you live in Poland, a country where among the leading politicians, climate change is something that is seen very skeptical. You are confronted with that. How do you believe that the arts and culture can deal with that, with skeptics, with people who like to conceal all these things?
I can say two things. One thing is that economy is also decoupled from the nature, and the people who use the nature should pay for it. So this is one story. But about the art, I can tell you the real story after the film was released and became popular. And I was riding a bike, and I was at the red light, and next to me there was a guy on a city bike, and this was a guy I would never feel very happy in his presence, a kind of big guy with a lot of tattoos and so on. And we are waiting for the green light, and he looks at me and says, "Hey, you're this guy from this film on ecology?" I said, yes, and I was a bit afraid what might happen. You know what you have done? I'm riding a city bike. So this is a kind of a message. Without scientific background, art could help us to transfer to the people, and I hope that we can do together something in this way.
Haben Sie den einen Radfahrer schon erreicht?
You've already reached out to one city biker, and you had to start thinking about stereotypes, such as what people look like and who you can reach. And that's great. Are you optimistic that...
They don't ride city bikes, not yet.
Not
At
yet.
least the majority of them. So we have to work on them. That's the only thing we can do.
Gerne die Frage an Sie alle drei.
But again, the question to all three of you, are you optimistic that what we've been talking about now, what could be a solution, technological innovations, a new lifestyle, a new attitude, that this will bring us back to a different understanding of us as part of nature in order to reach everybody? Are you optimistic that this would be enough? I don't know. Mr. Schneider said it's not 5 to 12, but it's already 12 o'clock. Or 1 minute past 12.
You just said again, back to a new understanding of the situation. No, forward to a new understanding. Is that really naive when being a farmer's daughter? I believe that my predecessors and your predecessors were closer to a kind of nature that they felt exposed to, at the mercy of nature. Well, I can't judge really, but I would really tend to believe that it's naive. My grandfather had a farm in Swabia, 12 children, only 6 of the 12 grew up at all. The others died of all sorts of infant diseases. He knew what hunger was. Christmas was for him, when the children got as presents an egg or a handful of nuts or an apple. So it's naive to want to return to that. I don't want that, and I don't want anyone else wants back to that. And I also think that the attitude that these small farmers had to have because of the ferociousness of nature, that's not what we want. We do not want to push people to a situation that is at the brink of a disaster and that must be maintained. And no, we've reached the point where this stewardship of planet Earth is our new role. We are the stewards of nature. We have the means and the resources to define the framework conditions of the development of the ecological sphere. And that's a different situation from that 4 to 5 generations ago found themselves in, when the point was to control nature, to exploit it, to use it. It's true, people lived more closely to nature. They were at the mercy of nature more than we can imagine today. And since we have a chance now to be more efficient when using the resources of nature to protect them, I think it would be naive to wish to return to those times. No, it's about moving forward. We are not talking about a romantic feeling toward nature and feeling how well it is, how well your soul feels in all that sort of circumstance. No, we need to talk about development, about further development. And as the German romanticists in the 18th century saw it, and being a mountaineer, I would say it's very obvious that it helps young people to learn how much nature can give them, the quality of life nature can give them. But I don't think it deserves the word back to. It's a movement towards something new. We are not moving backward, we're moving forward into a new age. And when looking back, we tend to romanticize most things. I
didn't want to say that we have to go back to a time where everybody had to work hard physically. My intention was rather, as Mrs. Kunst said at the beginning, that we have to keep in mind Humboldt, who had this view of nature and who propagated this view of nature 200 years ago. I have the feeling that farmers are very close to the soil. They know what happens when they deal with nature. Maybe that was my naive approach, and maybe that doesn't exist. I absolutely agree with you. It's very good to keep in mind a nature philosophical point of view and to use empirical findings in a combination, just as Alexander von Humboldt did, and to use this in order to create the Anthropocene. Of course, this is something very valuable, and this is very valuable to take people from kindergarten to the forest, to show them mushrooms, to show them which role the mushroom plays in the ecosystem of the forest, and which role the mule and other animals have, which are not as positively connotated. This is absolutely right and important. I completely agree with you. And yes, Alexander von Humboldt is an ideal. And this is, of course, not looking backward, but looking forward. But that has to do with the fact that Alexander von Humboldt was thinking in a way that people think like 200 years later.
He was definitely ahead of us. So what shall we do now? We have a few more minutes, and I think it's just the moment to discuss the next few steps. I think we agree that we need a Humboldtian approach to the world, which is not backward-looking, but forward-looking, giving scientists a chance to communicate to the public, to involve the public in scientific findings, to bring in culture and the arts. We know that scientists will continue to communicate. So what will be the next few steps? What would you wish to happen now, a couple of minutes after 12, so that the Anthropocene and does not end in the way that all of you described? The end of the world is not near. What would it take? What proposals do you have to deal with the situation now? How we turn all this into the best possible thing? Mr. Radas? Well, I can say something. Yes, indeed. We do stress in this connection very much that we are talking about transformation. Transformation has a dystopian coloring, but transformation, well, we do not yet know where it goes, and this gives us a chance to shape the way it is to develop. As far as the arts are concerned, this is a real adventure. Whether it's going to be a strenuous or a pleasant adventure, no idea, but there are a number of things that are difficult to predict. So seen from that angle, I think it's a great alternative. It definitely helps us to leave our usual trajectory and not falling back into yesterday's thinking. Even people who have very noble intentions should get out of their comfort zone occasionally, and transformation is a great place to try it. So one shouldn't be only negative about it all. For everyone involved, everywhere in the world, this is a huge opportunity. If only by understanding that no nation can say climate doesn't affect us, the climate change will stop at the borders. It's complete rubbish. Humanity needs to stand together, to work together, and this will open up new opportunities, I think. We are at the start of a very interesting adventure, right? That's the positive formulation. And I would like to ask you all to ask your questions. We have received reference to Dialogue of Humanity, the good websites that exist that provide a lot of information. And we got information about a great book on science communication. How do you communicate complex things? Thanks for your comments. If you want to ask questions, please do so. Otherwise, I suggest to start my closing round, because there's a question still on my mind that Mr. Radatz just mentioned, namely the dystopian nature of things. When we look at what climate researchers tell us, you really could start to panic, just as Mr. Malinowski's film warns us not to. There are more and more scientists discussing about whether they may have spoken about the opportunities for too long, whether they should really speak about the drama ahead. So communication on the part of scientists, artists and cultural workers, communication about the climate crisis, the death of species, death of biodiversity. Is that a dystopian element, or do we need more utopias? Something that doesn't look backward but look forward. How could that go? What's your trend? What do you think? Should it all go? Mr. Malinowski, would you start, please?
We have to be aware of two possible, let us say, lines of development. And the choice is ours, and we have to show people two possibilities, that if we take a wrong choice, that the way can be short and, let us say, steppy and on a very, very, very bad end. But there are still some ways around which can make us happy. And I don't think that we can provide just one model, what has to be done. But what is extremely important is also to convince people responsible for economy, for all the projects, that we cannot underestimate the costs of nature, of destroying the nature. If we calculate this cost properly, we will have a kind of information on a very background level, what activities are good for survival, and which activities are not good for survival. So I think that it's not only high culture and nature, but also a kind of the organization of the society we have to work on. And culture can help us to show these two ways, and scientists can help, but without the economy, we will be stuck.
Danke, Herr Malinowski. Herr Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Mr. Schneider, what do you think? Do you think that the doom will be terrible, or should we rather imagine what the beautiful?
Prefer the second option, really. We need positive narratives. We need optimism. We need the belief in the future. Your mind creates the universe, is what the Buddha is saying. So imagining what is possible can help to build a space of what is possible. That's what I say as a natural scientist. It sounds a bit weird, but when you don't have the space where you can ask certain questions, you won't get an answer. If we don't ask the right question, we will get no answers, neither right ones nor wrong ones. So when I have no narrative about what a positive development could be, how am I to convince people that it's worthwhile supporting that narrative? No one needs to support the end of the world. Then I can continue consuming as late capitalism propagated and hope that it will work for a while. But it's something like being on the Titanic, where the band continues playing while the whole thing is already going down. This is not really forward-looking. We don't even need that. We have lots of ingenious opportunities in which way the world can develop. I know there are others, dystopian fantasies or whatever, scenarios, but I would not look at those. Maybe it makes sense for artists, and when I think of the day after tomorrow and such films, it's not my world. My world is different. I want to see where the world heads to. What can I teach children? What can I give young people so that they support a better world? And I don't think that it works by frightening people. We need to have an idea about how to make the world a better place. Before Mr. Raddax translates that onto the theatrical stage, I would like to put all this to a practical test. So if you ever come to Hamburg, please come by and really think about that. How to talk to younger people. Rockström and others have developed a planetary diet saying, well, the transformation of agriculture is one of the most important things. At the same time, I have lots of farmers talking in discussions to me and saying, this is the world market, these are framework conditions, we have no other chance but to do what we've done all the time. And I don't see a real place for such a utopia to emerge, because people are under pressure from external conditions, and this is true for many occupations, for many jobs where people need to change. So what could that positive narrative be?
My father always said that he would never use a safety belt because it was circumscribe his freedom. From today's point of view, this is idiotic. But in the 60s, this was an attitude that was very popular. I've seen so many people who during the past years told me video conferences can never be conducted for legal reasons. It's no way of communication. Now we've got COVID-19 and everybody's participating in video conferences. Even large institutions which never wanted to do that, they are using video conferences today, and developments can be that fast. You can adapt to so many things, and the world market is no physical law. It is framed by the stakeholders, by politics. We are the voters. Why are we satisfied with certain policies? And of course, there are forces counteracting, forces who want to stick to their business models because they are very profitable for them. There are many people who don't want to change their habits, both as economic stakeholders as consumers. But of course, it's possible. The single farmer has relatively little possibilities to have an impact on the world market, and the small consumer has very little possibilities to reduce their carbon footprint to a reasonable level. But each farmer, each consumer is a voter. And I think with the positive narratives, we can create a constructive minority which can frame the political discourse into a certain direction. And arts also play a role in this process. And this can lead to an attitude which says we don't want to keep things as they are. We want different ways of dealing with agriculture, with transport, public transport. We want new habits of eating. We want a better labeling of CO2. We want to have other labels on products in the supermarket. And I could give you very many different examples. And these political changes happen in a democracy and even in authoritarian systems only if the political forces are supported who want this change. And this calls upon every single one of us. We have to position ourselves, and I think it's more easy to convince people with a positive narrative in order for them to decide for the future and not for the past with dystopian ideas.
So we seem to have found the first positive narrative. Change can happen more quickly than we ever expect, and every individual one of us can push it forward. Mr. Radatz, before speaking about politics, dystopia, a scenario of horrors to wake up people because they have finally understood how bad it can be, or what can be improved when it's all shown on stage? Well, many years ago, I tried to raise funds for sustainability project. Whenever I went to a ministry, they told me, well, yes, great idea, but don't do anything about the apocalypse. No, that was important for them. It should be nice after all. What was your response? Well, when you want to have their money, you say yes and smile, and then you think how you can go around it, and you wonder what the problem is they have. But the dystopia you mentioned, well, I believe, when I really ask myself, what can art contribute to these things that are necessary now? Well, what is necessary, when I spoke about banality some time ago, everything must have a quality on the level of text, of the performance, of the acting. It must be something different from mass culture with which we are polluted day in, day out. That would be important to me. That would be symbolic ecology. Of course, it's true to say that we need to have a positive narrative. Animal rights have become very important. So we need to think about new levels that are important. It's something very political. Don't we have to rethink people's rights, the rights of living beings? the rights of things that are currently regarded as objects are expected as living things. Here the arts can really play a role, but we are not the only ones. All in all, the aspect of touching emotions, reaching out to people is a key. I don't always know what it means really. Dresen, the film director, described once he directed an opera, and there came a moment where he had to cry, and he never knew why. I think these moments of being naive, being touched, allowing others to touch our hearts, that we must do more than ever before, and in that way we are innocent.
Thank you very much. Now he can close with acknowledging that positive reactions are necessary, and with the hope that with positive narratives we will reach the change that Mr. Schneider described more quickly. Now I've got one more complicated question from the chat. That is the question of how can we use the knowledge that we learned here, scientific knowledge, but also the experience of the arts. How can we transfer this to politics? Because this is where decisions are taken or aren't taken. There is a new European Green Deal, which says we want to change things, we want to implement the Paris Agreement. But at the same time, when we talk about agriculture or transport policies, we see how weak political institutions are, and that they are unable to react to these problems. Do you have some more positive narratives of how we can reach politics? Who wants to answer? I am afraid that this is not going to be that easy. In the field of politics, I've got the impression that this is a very difficult way. And the colleagues who provide consultations to politicians can tell you fabulous stories about their work, no matter whether it's on the level of a federal state government or the federal government of Germany or on the level of the European Union. I think this is very difficult. I've got two images which I think of when I think about this topic. One is the sentence of Albert Camus: we have to imagine Sisyphus as a happy man. I know many colleagues who for 2 decades have been working with politicians who want to convey scientific facts to the political process. And this is an incredibly tiresome business. But it's not only a Sisyphus work. Sometimes things remain, sometimes things can be reached, but it's a very slow and tiresome process. And I once read about the history of feminism, and this was always a fight. Both the liberation of slaves, the right to vote for women. We haven't reached full equality yet, and this is a story of resistance, of fight, of persistence, and it's nothing where society and politics just understood things and then things changed. No, it's a history of very hard work of very many stakeholders. And I assume that the ecological and social transformation, which also entail a cultural transformation, are also hard work. No matter how many positive narratives we create and how much optimism we have, we will have to persist, we will have to cooperate with people who will not be disappointed by many setbacks.
Professor Malinowski. Thank you, Professor Schneider. Professor Malinowski, your turn.
I completely agree with Professor Schneider. The title of Al Gore's film was genius. It's inconvenient truth, especially in the world of politics and in some world of part of the economy. And it will not be easy even having this positive narratives. But we have to do it. We have to convince people to find the politicians who do understand the problem. If we cannot work with the politicians who are not very resistive, we should find better politicians.
Vielen Dank, Professor Malinowski. Und Sie haben
Thank you, Professor Malinowski. And your film, It's Okay to Panic, actually laid a very important foundation stone for more to come. At the end of our discussion, we have something for you to demonstrate how the problem can be translated into the arts. It's a performative reading called Requiem for a Forest. And Frank Radatz was involved in that, and you can probably tell us a little more about it. Mr. Schneider just told us that we need to look ahead, that we need to look forward, that why do we now need to go back to Gilgamesh, a godlike king and his relationship with the forest? Well, yes, the performance covers several eras in history. The Gilgamesh epos is one of the first proofs we have about ecological issues. It's about the death of a tree king, which fits very well with the problems we have discussed here. We want to show that there is a vertical development. It has not become a new problem in the 20th century, suddenly dropping down from the heavens. No, the debate, the struggle with nature, with landscape, and how to cope with the conflicts arising in that context. All this is part of the original heritage of humanity. Well, perhaps when we look at the human species, the opportunities we have now have multiplied. In the past, people managed to cut down one forest. Now they are able to cut down many, many more forests. So that I believe that this eternal present that we appear to be living in, there is nothing relevant for us to come before us, we don't care about what happens. We live now and don't care about anything that's happening. We are part and parcel of nature, and we need to embrace that realization. The interesting thing is the mix. Today's scientists have their own comments on what the world has gone through, and maybe this is part of the new paradigms. The cultural and the scientific community can meet now in places that have been completely irrelevant 20 years ago, and was not conceivable that why should scientists climb on stage? Actors can do that much better than scientists. And why should scientists have emotional outbreaks? No, this time is over. And the new ground we are treading on has to do with emotions, with feelings, with thinking that is now more closely interlinked with emotions. And we need to develop that because we have the knowledge about the planet and the way in which we exist in this universe. Is that enough for the moment? Yes, indeed. I do hope, and I'm very excited. We will listen to Gilgamesh in a moment, and then let's see how the tree king is in danger. That was 5,000 years ago or so. And what it can all tell us today, after all, there are people still climbing on trees to try and stop coal development. So thank you, Mr. Radatz, Mr. Schneider, Mr. Malinowski, and thank you, Mrs. Kunz and Mrs. Eder, for this opening discussion of what is probably going to develop into a longer series, the debate about culture and sustainability. And we will close for today with the performative reading Requiem for a Forest by the Theatre of the Anthropocene.
Gilgamesh and his comrade Enkidu stood at the edge of the cedar forest. They observed the trees in silence and wondered at the immense height of their trunks. Then their eyes fell upon a clear grove leading into the forest, and at its edge was a path upon which Humbaba, the tree king and guardian of the forest, often walked and had trembled beneath his claws in ferocious onslaught. Enkidu grabbed his axe and cut down one of the divine trees. As the trunk fell, an angry roar sounded. Who came and felled the cedar? It was Humbaba himself who was speaking, his massive body covered with tree bark. Gilgamesh and Enkidu drew their bows and shot poisoned arrows at him, but they bounced off the king of the trees. His wooden paw grabbed the companion Enkidu and threatened to crush him. So Gilgamesh raised his battle axe and struck notches in Humbaba's scaly back, roaring with pain. The king raged, and the hero stepped back so as not to be crushed under the mighty limbs of the demon. Meanwhile, the skinful Enkidu had freed himself from Humbaba's firm grip. He pulled out his dagger, and with all his strength, he thrust it into the crowned head. The forest screamed, and resinous blood trickled out from Humbaba's forehead. It ran down the eyes and glued the lids together, blinding the king. Once more, Gilgamesh swung his battle axe and struck him. Humbaba, now blind and defenseless, staggered. The mountain trembled, and the earth shook as the mighty tree king fell. Quickly, the nimble Gilgamesh jumped forward, and with thunderous strikes, he separated Humbaba's head from the wooden neck. The hero pierced the head on the tip of his hunting spear and carried it to the city of Uruk, where he was welcomed by the cheers of the crowd. But when he offered the trophy to the sun god, the king of Lebanon said with regret, "What drove you to this deed? He should have sat next to you, broken the bread you eat, held the jug you drink from. You should have honored him."
It's burning everywhere right now. In the rainforest, in the cedar forest, in the redwoods, in our German forest. In recent years, forest fires have increased worldwide due to drought and heat waves, particularly in Europe. Through deforestation and destruction of habitat, 10,000 tree species worldwide are threatened to become extinct. That is every sixth tree species on Earth. Tree species are therefore more endangered by the man-made climate and nature crisis than other plants and animal species, of which every 8 species is endangered today. This fact is really hard to understand because trees seem so robust to us. Each individual lives hundreds to 1,000 years, some even reach 10,000 years of age. The ancestors of the wooden trees evolved wood fiber over 300 million years ago. And wood makes trees very big and old because the wind cannot easily bend them and because very few animals can eat wood. There are some insects, like the bark beetle, and otherwise mainly fungi. Wooden trees over 150 million years ago built incredibly dense forests on land on the supercontinent Pangaea, which was positioned at the equator at that time. The primeval forest stored an enormous amount of carbon in the soil, eventually forming coal. Today, coal is still the second most important source of energy for mankind. But if we continue to use it, this coal, this extract of the former primeval forest, if we turn all back to CO2, and then we will heat the Earth well over 4 degrees on average, with terrible consequences for people and forests and eventually all life on Earth. As humans, we cannot eat wood, but we have been using wood for weapons and clothing, as building and heating materials since we were around. And the forests give us even more than this direct benefit, but we don't thank them for that. Forests stabilize the local climate and the water balance. They provide shade, shelter from rain and wind. They store CO2 and produce oxygen. They provide habitat and food for a huge variety of animals, plants, and microorganisms. Therefore, people have always liked to build their settlements near forests. During the last few million years, in the changing warm and cold periods of Earth, forests were repeatedly pushed back by glacier masses. But after the last ice age, over 10,000 years ago, a very mild, stable climate was evolving that was favorable for forests and people. Yet through the rapidly growing settlements and then cities, a struggle, a clash between forests and humans developed, which was reported in the oldest writings, such as the Gilgamesh epic, the Greek myths, the Old Testament, and the Edda. Disrespecting their storyline of hubris and nemesis, we still think we'd be winners if we push back the wild forest, if we slash, cultivate, and burn it. After the Industrial Revolution, only 50% of Earth's forest cover remained, and today it is only about 30%. More areas are currently being deforested than grown, and if so, mostly through unsustainable forestry. Half of our forests today are managed, and the really old wild forests, which can store the most CO2, which give habitat for the most diverse species, they make up less than 15% of the Earth's surface. In addition to deforestation, climate change is now increasingly the enemy of the forest. So our forest is really not doing well. In Germany, a third of our landscape is still covered with forest, but this is mostly young forest, monocultures. The most common tree species in Germany, the conifers, spruce and pine, the deciduous trees, beech and oak, they really have a hard time. The droughts of recent years has led to the premature fall of the leaves and the clearing of the crowns. In the case of the spruce, mild winters favor the mass reproduction of bark beetles. The dying of trees is thus increasing. And every tree we lose worsens our carbon footprint. We use so much fossil fuel per year and person that each one of us would have to nurture 1,000 adult trees in order to neutralize one's CO2 emissions. It is really time that we should protect and honor the wild forest.
Hemlock, grand fir, yellow cedar, Douglas fir. The canopy is a colander stippling the beetle-swarmed surfaces with specks of sun. For every large trunk, a few hundred seedlings huddle on the litter. Sword fern, liverworts, lichen, and leaves as small as sand grains stain every inch of the dank downed logs. The mosses are themselves as dense as thumbnail forests. A bit of bushwhacking reveals the extent of the prodigious rot. crumbling, creature-riddled bowls decaying for centuries. Snacks, gothic and twisted, silvery as inverted icicles. A fecund putrefaction. The sheer mass of ever-dying life packed into each single cubic foot, woven together with fungal filaments, and you betrayed spiderweb leaves you woozy. Mushrooms ladder up the sides of trunks in terraced ledges. Dead salmon feed the tree. Soaked by fog all winter long, spongy green stuff that can't be named covers every wooden pillar in thick bays. Death is everywhere, oppressive and beautiful. Our kind will always dread these close choked thickets, where the beauty of solo trees gives way to something masked, scary, and crazed. There are things in here worse than wolves and witches. Primal fears that no amount of civilizing will ever tame. The trunk of an immense western red cedar. It reeks of incense. The top has sheared off, replaced by a candelabra of branches, promoted to standing trunks. A grotto opens at ground level in the rotted hardwood. Whole families of mammals could live inside it. But the branches, 1,000 years on, drooping with scaly sprays, a dozen stories high, are still crammed full of combs. Long life maker, thank you for the baskets and the boxes. Thank you for the cradles, the beds, canyons, paddles, poles, logs, posts, the rot-proof shakes and shingles, the kindling that will always light. Thank you for the tools, the chests, the decking, the clothes closets, the paneling. I forgot. Thank you for all these gifts that you have given. We're sorry. We didn't know how hard it is for you to grow back.
Hello, my name is Mei Tin Shi. I'm very happy to be here today. Actually, I'm a kindergarten teacher in Kreuzberg, and this is not an easy job. Seven years ago, love brought me here to Germany. Originally, I come from China, from Anyi. That is in the province Jiangxi. Close to my hometown, there's a little village, Liuzhen. It has a tree which is 1,000 years old. The trunk has a width of almost 4 meters. The people there say, if you walk around the tree for 10 times, then you can make a wish. Last time, when I was there, I did so. But what I wished for, I will not tell you. Chinese people love trees and meadows, so there are a lot of points and stories about them. Some time ago, I read a book, The King of Trees by Ah Chen. In this book, there is a big forest which is burned down. The trees are burning and flying in the air and falling back onto the earth. The people, they are running to the scene, watching the flames. They see animals, a deer, which is in panic and jumps around between the flames. This story made me very sad. Every time when I'm sad, I will sing. There's a lied which has touched me a lot. It's about searching a tree. Don't ask me where I come from. My homeland is far. Why do I wander around? Because of the birds in the sky, because of the stream that flows through the valley, and because of the endless meadows. That's why I wander around. And also because of the tree I have seen in my dreams. 为什么流浪远方，流浪。
Everything is interconnected. This sentence by Alexander von Humboldt is one of the first sentences that allows us to get the Earth system as a fully interconnected system. So Alexander von Humboldt was one of the first who managed to describe the Earth as an interconnected system with humanity and nature being part of the very same system. Today, when we discuss the Earth system, we talk about different spheres: the atmosphere, the biosphere, the hydrosphere, and then we could consider humanity as part of the biosphere. But we can also say, no, it's the anthroposphere. We might even, since the Industrial Revolution, talk about the technosphere, which is shaping part of the Earth system. There has been an effort with the United Nations to set up 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Those are reflecting these subsystems. And following those 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations would allow us to navigate through the 21st century, hopefully making the world a better world. Two of those Sustainable Development Goals refer to life on Earth and to climate action. Those two are also reflected in what is called the global planetary boundaries. This set of 9 boundaries are subsystems where, if humanity steps over the limits, we might endanger the way we are living on the planet. We have been living on the planet for the last thousands of years. So whether it's climate change or biodiversity integrity, those two which are reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals, whether one of these is more endangered than the other, it doesn't really matter. Because all of those subsystems, atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, technosphere, they are interconnected in a complex and non-linear way. And its single compartments are interconnected to other compartments in the other subsystems. So there is no way how humanity could survive without forests. And it is clear that as long as there are humans on Earth, we will make use of the forest. So what is the role of forests then, for example, for the question of climate stability? Forests are the major stock of carbon on Earth, in the terrestrial part of the Earth at the least. Maybe it's also the soils. But if you clear the forest, what follows is the degradation of soils. So after losing the carbon stock of the forest, you will lose the carbon stock of the soils just as well. At least this is for major parts of the Earth, the story that would evolve. So taking care for the forests on Earth is part of taking care for the global planetary boundaries, and it's also an integral part of taking into account the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. How could we care about forests? obviously, those primary forests that we are still having, we should try to keep them. We should have as much natural conservation as possible, because this is where the hotspots are of biodiversity. That's where the most species are found and where we need to protect them. On the other hand, we can use forests. There is actually not a single scenario that is not using biomass as a possibility to counteract for the carbon dioxide emissions in the 21st century if we would want to stay below those 1.5 degrees of global warming as has been negotiated in the Paris Agreement. If we want to do this, we need biomass, we need trees, we need the forest to capture carbon back from the atmosphere and to help us bring atmospheric levels to something that allows us for a decent climate path into the 22nd century. How can we do this? We could actually cut trees after planting them and having them grown for a longer period, and then take the wood and put it underneath somewhere in some old mines, so that the carbon is put aside, stored aside, just as we have been doing over millions of years with the forests that have been at that time in geological periods. Or, and I think this is much more efficient, we could take this wood and build houses from it. We can even think about wooden houses in the metropolitan areas of industrialized countries. Why not? We would save a lot of cement. And the concrete is one of the major factors for the emission of carbon dioxide. So trying to substitute concrete with wood is a very efficient way, actually, to use the managed forests not as a resource just for burning, but as a building material. By this, we would get a better balance of the carbon dioxide stocks between the biosphere, the atmosphere, and the anthroposphere. So maybe take this with you as a possibility to keep the planetary boundaries as a concept, making your way through the Sustainable Development Goals, preserving the pristine natural forests that there are in those parts of the world where they still exist, and using forests on managed land to make the best out of it for a common future.
As you probably know, people have always tried to make sense of the creation of the world, of its structure, and of its end. The result is a multitude of perspectives, many different explanations of the world, which have a lot in common. For example, the fabric of infinity, creation, and the end of the world, also called the apocalypse, form the temporal framework of our existence. There is also a moral framework, good and evil, below and above, heaven and hell, God and devil. They are in conflict, fighting for supremacy. The terrible consequences can be seen in the history of mankind. The Nordic people suggested a particularly interesting explanation. It is found in the Edda, written in the 13th century. The gods once planted a world tree, a huge ash tree called Yggdrasil, which when fully grown, makes up the whole cosmos A tree is a fractal being. It follows the geometry of self-similarity. The trunk develops itself into strong branches. These branches develop into thinner branches, and in turn to thick twigs, which reach out into thin twigs and to the leaves. The same fractal principle is used to construct the roots, which are a kind of underground crown. Numerous animals are living in the world tree. For example, 4 deer in the crown. Also, a clever, nameless, but unfortunately broken-winged eagle, between whose eyes a hawk is sitting, which occasionally flies out to provide the eagle with new visions. Under the ground, a dragon called Nidhuggur bites and claws at the roots of the ash tree. It also poisons the groundwater from which the world tree draws its strength. One is led to understand that the eagle is the principle of good. The dragon is the principle of evil. Between these two powers, a squirrel hurries back and forth across the trunk. Ratatosk, Drilltooth, delivers eagle's insults and threats to the dragon, and upon return, brings the dragon's slander back to the eagle. Meanwhile, for the ash tree, things are getting worse and worse. How much longer will it be able to stand there? They say the trembling of the tribe heralds the end of the world. One day, the tree may fall in a mighty storm and bury everything beneath itself. For Yggdrasil, the world tree, certain life forms are much more dangerous than others, such as the bark beetles, which excavate their tunnels everywhere between the bark and the trunk. The bark beetle lives in all possible places of the trunk, below, in the middle, above. It doesn't know the difference between good and evil. It has almost no horizon because it can only just see as far as the next chamber. It's a good place to live between tree and bark, a real comfort zone. The single bark beetle is completely harmless in itself. It is dangerous only when it appears by the thousands. The fallen tree offers a solid basis to life for quite some time. Even in a flood, even at the end of the world.
Liebe Beteiligte und Gäste unserer
Dear
Auftaktveranstaltung.
participants and guests of our opening event on culture and sustainability, I would like to thank Tanja Busse, Sabine Kunst, Szymon Malinowski, Frank Radatz, and Christoph Schneider for their contribution and the moderation of this very inspiring interdisciplinary exchange, which was a wonderful opening for our project, Culture and Sustainability. I thank the theater artists for their film, and I thank the interpreters to have helped us to understand each other. And I thank all of you out there in the world for your interest. Next week, on the 21st of October, on our web platform, there will be a talk between Kathleen Rögler and Cecile Weisbrot, both of them authors. And already now you can visit our virtual gallery and discover art on different topics. There you will also find the film with Szymon Malinowski, It's Okay to Panic. I'll be happy to see you again soon. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.